everyone, we are back with more Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by JK Rowling. Now, in this video, we are finishing up Chapter 6, Platform 9 3/4. But we better do a quick review. So, Harry Potter is the boy who lived. He is a wizard who survived being attacked by an evil dark wizard named Voldemort, or you know who. Sadly, his parents did pass away, so he had to live with his aunt, uncle, and cousin, the Dursleys. They are non-magic people called Muggles, and they are the worst. Not nice to him, do not like anything to do with wizarding, world, and just not great people. They tried to keep Harry from getting his letter to go to Hogwarts. And in doing so, they got to meet Hagrid, who is a giant who delivered Harry's letter to him on his 11th birthday. So, Harry and Hagrid went to Diagon Alley and shopped for all of his wizarding needs, books, wand, and went to Gringotts Wizarding Bank to pick up his money. So, we have now seen Harry get onto the train, the Hogwarts Express, on platform 9 3/4. Let's see how the rest of their ride goes to get to Hogwarts. Back to Chapter 6, Platform 9 3/4. While they had been talking, the train had carried them out of London. Now they were speeding past fields full of cows and sheep. They were quiet for a time, watching the fields and lanes flick past. Around 12:30, there was a great clattering outside in the corridor, and a smiling, dimpled woman slid back their door and said, "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Harry, who hadn't had any breakfast, leapt to his feet, but Ron's ears went pink again, and he muttered that he'd brought sandwiches. Harry went into the corridor. He had never had any money for sweets with the Dursleys, and now that he had pockets rattling with gold and silver, he was ready to buy as many Mars bars as he could carry. But the woman didn't have Mars bars. What she did have were Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Drooble's best blowing gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin patsies, cauldron cakes, licorice wands, and a number of other strange things Harry had never seen in his life. Not wanting to miss anything, he got some of everything and paid the woman 11 silver sickles and 7 bronze nuts. Ron stared as Harry brought it all back into the compartment and tipped it out onto an empty seat. "Hungry, are you?" "Starving," said Harry, taking a large bite out of a pumpkin patsy. Ron had taken out a lumpy package and unwrapped it. There were 4 sandwiches in there. He pulled one of them apart and said, "She always forgets I don't like corned beef." "Swap you for one of these?" said Harry, holding up a patsy. "Go on." "You don't want this, it's all dry," said Ron. "She hasn't got much time," he added quickly. "You know, we're 5 of us." "Go on, have a patsy," said Harry, who never had anything to share before, or indeed anyone to share it with. It was a nice feeling, sitting there with Ron, eating their way through all of Harry's patsies and cakes. The sandwiches lay forgotten. "What are these?" Harry asked Ron, holding up a pack of chocolate frogs. "They're not really frogs, are they?" He was starting to feel that nothing would surprise him. "No," said Ron, "but see what the card is. I'm missing a gripper." "What?" "Oh, of course, you would know. Chocolate frogs have cards inside them, you know, to collect. Famous witches and wizards. I've got about 500, but I haven't got a gripper or polterme." Harry unwrapped his chocolate frog and picked up the card. It showed a man's face. He wore half-moon spectacles, had a long crooked nose and flowing silver hair, beard, and mustache. Underneath the picture was his name, Albus Dumbledore. "So this is Dumbledore," said Harry. "Don't tell me you've never heard of Dumbledore," said Ron. "Can I have the frog? I might get a gripper. Thanks." Harry turned over his card and read, "Albus Dumbledore, currently headmaster of Hogwarts, considered by many the greatest wizard of modern times, Professor Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and 10-pin bowling. Harry turned the card back over and saw, to his astonishment, that Dumbledore's face had disappeared. "He's gone!" "Well, you can't expect him to hang around all day," said Ron. "He'll be back. No, I've got Morgana again, and I've got about 6 of her. Do you want it? You can start collecting." Ron's eyes strayed to the pile of chocolate frogs waiting to be unwrapped. "Help yourself," said Harry. "But in, the Muggle world, people just stay put in photos." "Do they? What, they don't move at all?" Ron sounded amazed. "Weird." Harry stared as Dumbledore slided back into his picture on his card and gave him a small smile. Ron was more interested in eating the frogs than looking at the famous witches and wizards cards, but Harry couldn't keep his eyes off them. Soon he had not only Dumbledore and Morgana, but Hengst of Woodcroft, Albert Grindon, Circe, Paraclesis, and Merlin. He finally tore his eyes away from the druid's Celadona, who was scratching her nose, to open a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. "You want to be careful with those," Ron warned Harry. "When they say every flavor, they mean every flavor. You get all the ordinary ones like chocolate and peppermint and marmalade, but then you get spinach and liver and tripe. George reckons he had a bogey-flavored one once." Ron picked up a green bean, looked at it, and carefully bit into the corner. "Blah! See? Sprouts!" They had a good time eating the every flavor beans. Harry got toast, coconut, baked bean, strawberry, curry, grass, coffee, sardine, and was even brave enough to nibble the end off a funny gray one Ron wouldn't touch, which turned out to be pepper. The countryside now flying past the window was becoming wilder. The neat fields had gone. Now there were woods, twisting rivers, and dark green hills. There was a knock on the door of their compartment, and the round-faced boy Harry had passed on the platform 9 3/4 came in. He looked tearful. "Sorry," he said, "but have you seen a toad at all?" When they shook their heads, he wailed, "I've lost him. He keeps getting away from me." "He'll turn up," said Harry. "Yes," said the boy miserably. "Well, if you see him." He left. "Don't know why he's so bothered," said Ron. "If I'd brought a toad, I'd lose it as quick as I could. Mind you, I brought Scabbers, so I can't talk." The rat was still snoozing on Ron's lap. "He might have died and you wouldn't know the difference," Ron said in disgust. "I tried to turn him yellow yesterday to make him look more interesting, but the spell didn't work. I'll show you. Look." He rumbled around in his trunk and pulled out a very battered-looking wand. It was chipped in places, and something white was glistening at the end. Unicorn hairs nearly poking out. Anyway, he had just raised his wand when the compartment door slid open again. The toadless boy was back, but this time he had a girl with him. She was already wearing her Hogwarts robes. "Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one," she said. She had a bossy sort of voice, lots of bushy brown hair, and rather large front teeth. "We've already told him we haven't seen it," said Ron, but the girl wasn't listening. She was looking at the wand in his hand. "Oh, are you going to do magic? Let's see it then." She sat down. Ron looked taken aback. All right." He cleared his throat. "Sunshine daisies, butter mellow, turn the stupid fat rat yellow." He waved his wand, but nothing happened. Scabbers stayed gray and fast asleep. "Are you sure that's a real spell?" said the girl. "Well, it's not a very good one, is it? I've tried a few simple spells just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody's in my family has magic at all. It was ever a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased. Of course, it's the very best school of witchcraft there is, I've heard. I've learnt all our books off heart, of course. I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you?" She said all this very fast. Harry looked at Ron and was relieved to see that by his stunned face he hadn't learnt all the sets of book by heart either. "I'm Ron Weasley," Ron muttered. "Harry Potter," said Harry. "Are you really?" said Hermione. "I know all about you, of course. I've got a few extra books for background reading, and you're in Modern Magical History and The Rise and Fall of Dark Arts and Great Wizarding Events of the 20th Century. "Am I?" said Harry, feeling dazed. "Goodness, didn't you know? I'd have found out everything I could if it was me," said Hermione. "Do either of you know what house you'll be in? I've been asking around, and I hope I'm in Gryffindor. It sounds by far the best. I hear Dumbledore himself was one, but I suppose Ravenclaw wouldn't be too bad. Anyway, we'd better go off and look for Neville's toad. You two had better change, you know. I expect we'll be there soon." She left, taking the toadless boy with her. "Whatever house I'm in, I hope she's not in it," said Ron. He threw his wand back into his trunk. "Stupid spell. George gave it to me. I bet he knew it was a dud." "What house are your brothers in?" asked Harry. "Gryffindor," said Ron. Gloom seemed to be settling on him again. "Mum and Dad want it too. I don't know what they'd say if I'm not. I suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad. Don't suppose Ravenclaw would be too bad, but I imagine if they put me in Slytherin." "That's the house you know who was in?" "Yeah," said Ron. He flopped back into his seat, looking depressed. "You know, I think the ends of Scabbers' whiskers are a bit lighter," said Harry, trying to take Ron's mind off houses. "So what do your oldest brothers do now that they've left anyway?" Harry was wondering what a wizard did once he finished school. "Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, and Bill's in Africa doing something for Gringotts," said Ron. "Did you hear about Gringotts? It's been all over the Daily Prophet, but I don't suppose you get that with the Muggles. Someone tried to rob it, a high-security vault." Harry stared. "Really? What happened to them?" "Nothing. That's why it's such big news. They haven't been caught. My dad says it must have been a powerful dark wizard to get around Gringotts, but they don't think they took anything. That's what's odd. Of course, everybody gets scared when something like this happens in case you know who's behind it." Harry turned this news over in his mind. He started to get a prickle of fear every time you know who was mentioned. He supposed this was all part of entering the magical world, but it had been a lot more comfortable saying Voldemort without worrying. "What's your Quidditch team?" Ron asked. I don't know any," Harry confessed. "What?" Ron looked dumbfounded. "Oh, you wait. It's the best game in the world." And he was off, explaining all about the 4 balls and the positions of the 7 players, describing famous games he'd been to with his brothers, and the broomstick he'd like to get if he had the money. He was just talking Harry through the finer points of the game when the compartment door slid open again, but it wasn't Neville, the toadless boy, or Hermione Granger this time. 3 boys entered, and Harry recognized the middle one at once. It was the pale boy from Madame Malkin's robe shop. He was looking at Harry with a lot more interest than he'd shown back in Diagon Alley. "Is it true?" he said. "They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment. So it's you, is it?" "Yes," said Harry. He was looking at the other boys. Both of them were thick-set, looked extremely mean. Standing on either side of the pale boy, they looked like bodyguards. "This is Crabbe, and this is Goyle," said the pale boy carelessly, noticing where Harry was looking. "And my name's Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Ron gave a silent cough, which might have been hiding a snicker. Draco Malfoy looked at him. "Think my name's funny, do you? No need to ask who you are. My father told me all. The Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford." He turned back to Harry. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter." I don't want you go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. "I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks," he said coolly. Draco Malfoy didn't go red, but a pink tinge appeared on his pale cheeks. "I'd be careful if I were you, Potter," he said slowly. "Unless you're a bit politer, you'll go the same way as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them either. You hang around with the riffraff like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and it'll rub off on you." Both Harry and Ron stood up. Ron's face was as red as his hair. "Say that again," he said. "Oh, you're going to fight us, are you?" Malfoy sneered. "Unless you get out now," said Harry, more bravely than he felt, because Crabbe and Goyle were a lot bigger than him or Ron. "But we don't feel like leaving, do we, boys? We've eaten all our food, and you seem to still have some." Goyle reached towards the chocolate frogs next to Ron. Ron leapt forward, but before he had so much as touched Goyle, Goyle let out a horrible yell. Scabbers the rat was hanging off of his finger. Sharp little teeth sunk into Goyle's knuckle. Crabbe and Malfoy backed away as Goyle swung Scabbers round and around, howling. Then Scabbers finally flew off and hit the window. All three of them disappeared at once. Perhaps they thought there were more rats lurking among the sweets, or perhaps they'd heard footsteps, because a second later Hermione Granger came in. "What has been going on?" she said, looking at all the sweets all over the floor and Ron picking up Scabbers by his tail. "I think he's been knocked out," Ron said to Harry. He looked closer at Scabbers. "No, I don't believe it. He's gone back to sleep." And so he had. "Have you met Malfoy before?" Harry explained about their meeting in Diagon Alley. "I've heard of his family," said Ron darkly. "They were some of the first to come back to our side after you-know-who disappeared. Said they'd been bewitched. My dad doesn't believe it. He says Malfoy's father didn't need an excuse to go over to the dark side." He turned to Hermione. "Can we help you with something?" "You'd better hurry up and put on your robes. I've just been up to the front to ask the driver, and he says we're nearly there. You haven't been fighting, have you? You'll be in trouble before we even get there." "Scabbers has been fighting, not us," said Ron, scowling at her. "Would you mind leaving while we change?" "All right. I only came in here because people outside are behaving very childishly, running up and down the corridors," said Hermione in a sniffy voice. "And you've got dirt on your nose, by the way. Did you know?" Ron glared at her as she left. Harry peered out of the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forest under a deep purple sky. The train did seem to be slowing down. He and Ron took off their jackets and pulled on their long black robes. Ron's were a bit short for him. You could see his trainers beneath them. A voice echoed through the train. "We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately." Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Ron, he saw, looked paler under his freckles. They crammed their pockets with the last of the sweets and joined the crowd thronging in the corridor. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way towards the door and out to the tiny dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over their heads, and the students and Harry heard a familiar voice. First years over here. All right there, Harry." Hagrid's big, hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. "Come on, follow me. Any more first years? Mind your step now. First years, follow me." Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark, either side of them, that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffled once or twice. "You'll get your first sight o' Hogwarts in a sec," Hagrid called over his shoulder. "Just round the bend here." There was a loud "Ooh!" The narrow path had opened suddenly, on the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. "No more 4 in a boat," Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting on the water by the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everyone in?" shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then. Forward!" And the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. "Heads down!" yelled Hagrid, for the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads a little, and the boats carried them through a curtain of ivy which hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor, where they clambered out onto the rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there! Is this your toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up the passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last on a smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around a huge oak front door. "Everyone here? You there, still got your toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. That's the end of chapter 6. There's Hogwarts. So that's the end of chapter 6, platform 9 3/4. Let's do a little discussion about what we read. How are Hermione, Neville, and the Weasleys, especially Ron, described or introduced in this chapter? So, the Weasleys were introduced right when Harry was trying to get onto the platform, right? They're all a bunch of redheaded kids, and Harry got to hear them talking to their family and their mom and little sister Ginny. So, the 4 we were introduced to were Percy, Fred, and George, who are twins, and then Ron. And Ron was a tall, they call him gangly, so he's kind of skinny, means his arms are really long, maybe, that time in your life when you haven't quite grown into how you're going to look later. Hermione comes by helping Neville look for his toad, right? They describe her as having big, bushy hair, already in her dress, or already in her Hogwarts robes, ready to go. And Neville just keeps losing his toad, doesn't he? What are some of their identifying features? So we talked about the Weasleys and their red hair. Hermione and her bushy hair. What are some other things about poor Neville? He looked tearful. He was a little bit bigger. Had brown hair. The twins, Fred and George, look identical, so you can't tell them apart. They're really tall, red hair as well. What are some of the sweets that Harry buys from the trolley? So he was really excited, right? So he was going to get, what they call Mars bars, but things like Snickers and other, chocolates and things that he knows in the Muggle world that he'd never gotten to get before. But then he gets to the trolley and it's things like pumpkin patsies and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and chocolate frogs, which jump. What were some of the other things? They also had cauldron cakes. Lots of very cool things. Those every flavor beans, I don't think I could try. Not if I accidentally got earwax or something. Gross. How are the first year students brought from the train to Hogwarts. So first off, Hagrid's the one that takes them, right? And then they all get on boats, and the boats float across the lake on their own, and they go under the castle and float into it. There's the castle right there. Looks kind of eerie at night, doesn't it? So, I like to talk about the chapter title. Why do you think this chapter was named Platform 9 3/4? Well, that's where the Hogwarts Express was, right? That's what Harry had to find to get onto the train to go to Hogwarts. And it was pretty important. Why do you think it was pretty important? Because that was kind of his first big step into the wizarding world without Hagrid, right? Going through that gate and trusting that it was magic. All right, so that is all we are going to discuss with Chapter 6, Platform 9 3/4. We will be back next time with the next chapter of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by JK Rowling. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.